Well, we made it to Friday, and that means it's time for the Morning Pitt Mailbag here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Always look forward to these, as I always say. I say this every week, and I think it's just to continue endorsing people and supporting people and hopefully pushing people to submit questions for the mailbag. Of course, you know how we do it. Every Tuesday or Wednesday, we put up a post on the Between Fifth and Forbes message board at Panther-Lair.com and say, hey, it's time for the questions. Post your questions for this week's mailbag. Then Pitt fans post a bunch of questions about Pitt football or basketball or recruiting or whatever else is on their mind. I answer as many as we can here on the Friday edition of the Morning Pitt. It all comes together like that. I think it's a nice way to end the week, and we get to hit on a bunch of different topics. As always, a quick programming note. Quick. Like how I said that. A quick programming note as we move forward. Next week, we'll have a Morning Pitt on Monday and Tuesday, and then we're going to take a few days off because I'm actually going to take a trip out of town. It's the kids' spring break at school, so we're going to actually be off for a little while. No Morning Pitts on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, or actually the following week are Monday and Tuesday. So we'll have about 5 days without a Morning Pitt. I apologize, unless I'm able to get some things put together this weekend and record them in advance and just have those sort of locked and loaded and ready to go. It's tough though because chances are there's going to be news. There's going to be news about transfer additions for the basketball team, transfer departures for the football team after spring camp ends. And so it's going to be tough to do too much in advance because there's going to be news to talk about. And so I'm not going to sit here and project the starting five when they might add 3 guys while I'm out of town. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. We'll have some stuff next week, Monday and Tuesday, recapping the spring game and recapping any transfer news that comes out on those days. And then we'll be back again a week later. So take a little bit of time, a little trip with the family over spring break. No Ocean City or anything like that. It's a family trip over spring break, but did want to give you a heads up on that. Of course, we'll be back we won't have a Morning Pitt mailbag next week, but we will definitely have one the week after that. So get all your questions locked and loaded, be all, ready to go, and we'll dive back into it. But for now, let's dive into this week's questions on the Morning Pitt mailbag here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. All right, it's Friday edition of the Morning Pitt, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. We always ask you to do before we dive into the questions here, like this video and subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. That way you don't miss any of our Pitt video content. These daily Morning Pitt videos, our weekly live show every Wednesday night at 8:30, not next Wednesday, but nevertheless. And our, post-game press conferences, interviews, all those kinds of things. It's all right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So like and subscribe, and you won't miss any of it. All right, let's jump into the questions. There were actually a few questions left over from last week that I wanted to get to. And so we'll do a couple of these, and then we'll move forward and get all the questions from this week. And so one question from last week, Panther Bandy said, since it has come out that Pitt does have a football GM, has anyone ever interviewed him? Will he be a prime target for someone from Panther-Lair? So you're talking about Doug Whaley. We had a big conversation about this, like 2 conversations, actually. We had a conversation, I think I did a Morning Pitt episode last week saying, should Pitt hire a GM? And then I asked Pat Narduzzi about it, and he said, we do have a GM. It's Doug Whaley, who, Narduzzi said he works for Pitt. He actually works for Alliance 412, separate entity, third-party thing, but he's doing the job of GM for the Pitt football program. And then we talked about that this week. We talked about, kind of elaborated on that and dug into that topic, pardon the phrase, but dug into that topic a little bit more on the matter. Has anyone ever interviewed him? Not really. I think Doug Whaley has largely stayed kind of behind the scenes, stayed in the shadows, stayed a little bit quiet, not really putting himself out there too much. I interviewed him once after there was a bit of a kerfluffle over some comments he made during an appearance on The Fan about Kenny Pickett. When he was sort of speaking as an NFL analyst, not speaking as Pitt's GM. So I interviewed him there and shared some of his comments and reactions, why he said some of or what he meant with some of the things he said about Kenny Pickett. I posted those on the message boards back at the old place. But that's about it. I think Whaley is largely, like I say, he stayed in the shadows, doing the work, but just doing the work sort of behind the scenes. It would be good to interview him. My guess is everything seems like it feels like there's such a gray area right now that nobody's really going to be interested in that kind of on-the-record conversation at this point, but maybe as we get more into the era of revenue sharing, something could happen there. But there's interest, I would say. There's interest in having that conversation. Pocono Panther says, has the freshman quarterback from Ohio shown enough to be trusted as the QB3, or will Pitt look for a more experienced quarterback to back up Eli Holstein and Julian Duggar, even perhaps from the JUCO ranks? That's an interesting question. We actually talked to Cade Bell yesterday, spoke to him for the first time in spring camp, the only time in spring camp. And one of the things he said was that at a certain point in the offseason, and maybe early in the offseason, he really kind of had a feeling that, or he came to a decision and he took it to Pat Narduzzi, and Narduzzi signed off on it, where he really said, you know what, like 3 scholarship quarterbacks, that's not a lot. But they knew what they had in Eli Holstein. They liked what they'd seen out of Julian Duggar, and they felt confident about Mason Heinschel coming in. So rather than going and trying to get 1 or 2 transfers to fill out the room so you have 4 or 5 scholarship quarterbacks, they said, let's, and this is what Cade Bell said, let's develop these guys. Let's focus on these 3 guys. Let's develop them. And he talked about how they had he said 7 or 8 quarterbacks in the room last spring. Obviously you had Holstein, but you had Nate Yarnell and Ty Diefenbach and Christian Bayer, and then they had 2 or 3 walk-ons along with those guys. So it was a bigger room. It was a more crowded room. And he sort of said that he didn't feel like those guys got enough work. And so this year, he said the quarterbacks have thrown like 900 passes or something like that in spring camp. And that's all spread over the 3 scholarship guys plus David Lynch. So he wanted to get more work for those guys. Is a roundabout way or a long way of saying, no, I don't think they're going to try and add another quarterback. I don't think they're going to try and bring in an experienced quarterback. For one thing, I mean, just as an aside, you're talking about an experienced quarterback to play, in your question, you say to back up Eli and Julian Duggar. You're talking about getting trying to get an experienced quarterback to come in and be the third stringer, which I think would probably be a tough sell to begin with. Then are you really going to find someone who's much better of an option than the freshman? But more to the point, to the first part of your question, has the freshman quarterback Mason Heinschel shown enough to be trusted as a QB3? I think he has. Everything we've heard this spring, we've heard a lot of rave reviews about Mason Heinschel. We've heard a lot of rave reviews about Julian Duggar. I think those 2 guys are more than up to the task of being the QB2 and QB3. And, who knows? They might even push Eli Holstein. I'm not going to rule that out. I think at this point in spring camp last year, I had more or less ruled out the possibility of anybody unseating Nate Yarnell. It felt like Christian Bayer would probably transfer. It felt like Eli Holstein would be the number 2 and Ty Diefenbach would be the number 3. Of course, by the time we got to training camp, after Nate Yarnell had been pretty much firmly in place as the QB1, by the time we got to the end of camp, it was Eli Holstein's job. I'm coming out of spring camp right now saying, there's a non-zero chance that Duggar and Heinschel can push Holstein. I really think that, and compete for that job. I think Holstein entered spring camp as the QB1. He'll exit spring camp as the QB1, and ditto for training camp. And probably he's the odds-on favorite to be the starting quarterback this season. But I think Duggar and Heinschel are good enough. They've shown enough, and they've had good enough springs that they can push him. They can battle with him. And so I think Cade Bell feels good about the 3 quarterbacks that he has. He feels good about where Eli Holstein is right now. I think he feels good about having to go to about what would happen if he had to go to Julian Duggar. And I think he feels good about what would happen if he had to go to Mason Heinschel, behind Holstein and Duggar. So I think they feel pretty good about the situation. I don't see them adding anybody from the JUCO ranks or a transfer or anything like that. I think they'll go with these 3 scholarship quarterbacks. And then, unless somebody leaves or something, and then, the situation changes. But I think they'll go with these 3 scholarship quarterbacks and ride with it and take those guys into the season and feel pretty confident in doing so. Lacey22 last week asked Chris, since player procurement is mostly these days about money, have you heard of any new ideas or revenue generating mechanisms from the new athletic department or new athletic director or Alliance 412? No, nothing really new. I mean, the biggest thing we've seen is the athletic directors fund that Pitt announced, I don't know when, in December or something like that they were restarting the athletic directors fund. It's a bit of a discretionary fund for the athletic director, and which I think effectively translates as donate to this fund and it'll get used toward revenue sharing. That's the long and short. That's probably the short way of saying it. You can read the big press release or the big announcement that they had. There are many words and many paragraphs. I think what it boils down to is this money can be used toward revenue sharing. And if you donate into this athletic directors fund, which is officially part of the university, it'll be tax deductible. I haven't heard anything new from Alliance 412, but I sort of think Alliance 412 is in a weird spot right now, a weird kind of holding pattern, because I don't think they know what their future really looks like. I mean, I think there's still a future for collectives and third-party groups like Alliance 412. I think they're still going to exist. I think they're still going to be needed, and I think they're still going to be part of the equation because even though there's revenue sharing, you're still going to need money on top of that. You know, everybody's going to have the option to give $20.5 million in the revenue sharing. That's a level playing field right there. What will still separate schools is what they can come up with in NIL money from third-party groups like the collectives. And I think because of this, the collectives like Alliance 412 are still going to have a major role in the sport. And so they're going to be needed, but I don't know, like I haven't seen major movement from Alliance 412, and I only take that to mean that they're not entirely sure what Pitt envisions as their role. You know, I don't think Pitt can be so close-minded as to think that, or so sort of oblivious as to think that the revenue sharing alone and the money you can get from the school will be enough to take care of the roster needs. You're still going to need those third parties. And for Pitt, that means Alliance 412. So Pitt needs to embrace Alliance 412 and endorse Alliance 412 and support Alliance 412 and amplify the message from Alliance 412 because it's still going to be important. But for now, the collective is sort of, like I say, it feels like it's in a holding pattern because I don't think they really know what Pitt's purpose is for them and at what role Pitt sees the collective playing. So everything's kind of in a, like I say, a holding pattern with that. All right, questions from this week. Diehard Panther says, in all your years covering Pitt football, which player's performance was a pleasant surprise based off physical appearance? On the opposite side, which players looked the part but did not produce on the field? I mean, some of the bigger surprises in terms of guys and their physical appearance, like, I mean, I never thought Dion Lewis would rush for 1,800 yards as a true freshman. You know, I didn't really know if Desmond Reed would be able to have the kind of season that he had. And that was partially about him just being small. Yeah, I counted him out because he was small, and I think that's probably been happening to him his whole life. And he's been proving people wrong, just like he proved me wrong his whole life. Like, I am very much a Desmond Reed believer at this point, just like after his first year, I was very much a Dion Lewis believer. I mean, like, we fall into the trap of judging the book by how tall it is, right? You mix that up, it doesn't matter. And so when these guys go out and have the seasons they've had, yeah, there's a surprise there. Like, holy cow, Dion Lewis, this dude can play. Like, this is a legit player. Like, holy cow, Desmond Reed. Like, not only are there no questions about his height, there are no questions about transitioning from FCS to the Power 4 conferences. Because he is a legitimate Power 4 player, and he got overlooked because of his size. He almost got overlooked because of his size at Pitt. There was only one guy who believed in him. It was Cade Bell, who had coached him. You know, Panarduzzi needed to be convinced. And he got convinced just like all the rest of us. So those guys would definitely be at the top of the list for you dismiss them because of their physical appearance, and then they show you what's up. On the other side, I mean, you know, Bengali Kamara is always my guy, right? I mean, he looked like $1 million. He looked like he was going to be awesome. And I think there was a high expectation from everybody, not just me, but everybody in the program that he was going to be awesome. And then he was decidedly not awesome. But I mean, we've seen plenty of guys who look great getting off the bus and they just don't, you know, I mean, Chief Borders looked like a monster last year. You know, David Ojebwe looked the part last year and it just didn't come together for them on the field. So, you know, there have been plenty of guys that probably go both ways. I mean, like, look, if you ran into Levance Fields on the street in 2007 and you didn't know anything about Pitt basketball, you would probably not assume that he was like a legit big-time starting point guard for one of the best teams in the nation. You probably would not assume that just based on meeting him on the street. And even if you put him in shorts and a tank top on the court, you would not assume that until he started dribbling and doing other things he did. So we all fall into that trap. We all judge these guys by how they look, and then their play ultimately tells the story. Jay Lazinger says, do you have any sense for how respected Jeff Capel and Pitt are in the portal? Is it better to have an opportunity to play like this year or to supplement like last year was supposed to be? Also, bonus question, do you think Jalen Lowe leaves if we had a tourney year? These are great questions. I don't have a sense for how Jeff Capel and Pitt are respected in the portal. I think Capel is probably respected more than Pitt. You know, I just think with Pitt, like Pitt's not a blue blood in college basketball, right? And so in order for a school that's not a blue blood to establish itself as a power, they got to win a lot. You know what I mean? They got to be at the top of the sport like they were in the 2000s. Pitt established itself in a certain position, and they were able to recruit a certain way when they were at the top of the sport. Once they started losing again, they fell out of relevance. And I don't know that they've really reclaimed that in the last 10 years. And so that is a tough hill to climb. It's a tough obstacle to overcome. Jeff Capel, as far individually as a coach, as a, mentor or whatever, I think he's got a pretty good reputation. I think it's deserved. I think he's good with the players. I think he connects with the players. I think he's good in that regard and probably has a pretty good reputation as a result. But that's just sort of my 1,000-yard take on it. I'm not close enough to say for sure, but that's sort of how I see things. Is it better to have an opportunity to play or to supplement? I mean, I think guys are coming in to play. I think unless you are in a unique situation like, Sidney Nadir a couple years ago who came in just to be a bench guy, most guys are looking for an opportunity to play. Either a guy who has outplayed his level and wants to be on the court at a higher level, or a guy who's trying to step down a level so he can get on the floor. I think everybody wants to play and be paid, and those two are probably equal pursuits. Do I think Jalen Lowe leaves if Pitt made the tournament this year? I don't know. I have no idea. I can't say. I mean, like, I can guess as to various reasons why Jalen Lowe left. Money would be one. Probably a significant amount of frustration from him. This past season, I'm sure this year was difficult. It was difficult for a lot of people, and I'm sure that was the case with Jalen Lowe. But making the tournament, not making the tournament, I don't know. I don't know how that would have impacted his personal decision-making, as it relates to coming back or returning or whatever, or going to the portal. I'm really not sure. So I can't speak to it. Spenges says, Lucas Kroll and Gavin Bartholomew as the tight end tandem were critical to Pitt's most successful offense in season since the 1980s. How close to their 2021 numbers and impact can this season's tight ends get? Well, let's bring up the numbers. Kroll caught 38 for 451 and 6 touchdowns in 2021. Bartholomew had 27 for 317 and 4 scores. So that's 65 catches, 768 yards, and 10 touchdowns. I don't think Pitt's tight ends this year will have 65 catches, 768 yards, and 10 touchdowns. I don't see that happening. More critical to the success of that team was Jordan Addison going for 100 catches, 1,600 yards, and 17 scores. Kroll and Bartholomew were important. They played a big role. They scored 10 touchdowns. You know what I mean? If you get 10 touchdowns out of a position group, out of the tight ends in particular, then that's a really productive season. I don't think there have been many other times when Pitt has gotten 10 touchdowns out of the tight ends unless they got it from one guy like Doran Dickerson in 2009. So I don't think this year's tight ends, Jake Overman and Malachi Thomas, and I guess Jake Renda, if he's ever healthy, I don't think they're going to combine for 10 touchdowns. I think the emphasis and the focus will be and should be on getting Kenny Johnson going, and Deuce Spann going, and Blue Hicks going, and Tony Kinsler going, and Poppy Williams and Sensor Lee, and all these different guys. Cade Bell talked yesterday about liking the depth that he has at wide receiver. That he feels like they're much deeper at receiver this year than they were last year. And so they're going to need to take advantage of that. They're going to need to maximize that. And that's ultimately what is going to be crucial this season, is how the receivers get involved and how much those guys score. I don't think this year's tight ends will match the production, what I said, 65 for 768 and 10 touchdowns. I don't think they're going to get that out of the tight ends this year. That's just me. I do think Jake Overman can be useful. I saw him make a really nice catch yesterday, actually, where he was running like an out pattern, and where I was standing, if he didn't catch the ball, it would have hit me right in the face. And so shout out to Jake Overman for saving my life with that catch. But it was a good catch, good hands, and I think he can make plays. I think he can help them. I think he was more useful last year. I've said this a million times. I think he was more useful last year than I expected him to be. And I think he can build on that this year as the tight end 1. But I still don't know if the group will catch 10 touchdowns. 2 questions that kind of tie together here. Richard 2928 says, Chris, with all the changes in the college football revenue sharing and NIL, do you think that if done correctly, scouting, recruiting, development, and coaching, the floor for Pitt football should be 8 wins per season? And then Zenmeister 1992 says, do you think as a whole, NIL, the transfer portal, and the new age of college athletics in general will be a net positive for Pitt athletics or a net negative? So overall, it's a question of, can Pitt survive in this new world of college athletics? Can Pitt survive in what this world is going to be? And survival can mean different things, right? Is survival having a competitive football program? Is survival fielding an entire, full athletic department, as full as it currently is? What does survival look like? Is survival just keeping your football program and men's basketball program in a power conference? I think there's different definitions of survival. Richard asked, can the floor be an 8-win season? I think the floor should continue to be an 8-win season. Can all of these new things be a net positive for Pitt? Look, Pitt is going to always have to, unless something drastically changes in the structure of this whole thing, or in the amount of support that Pitt has, Pitt is always going to have to moneyball its way to success. They're going to have to find market inefficiencies. They're going to have to be able to identify the players who really fit what they want to do. And they're going to have to find those guys that they can get for a little bit cheaper. They have to go get a defensive end from Utah State. They have to go get a running back from Western Carolina. This is what they have to. They have to go get a 6'7" 3-point shooter who, was out of basketball for 2 years. They have to go find these guys. This is what they have to do. This is how they have to make their living and build their rosters. And it's harder to do. You have to put in more man hours. You have to work harder to find these guys, but this is what they're going to have to do because they're not going to have the resources. This slideshow here is from Pitt playing against Clemson. Clemson will have more resources than Pitt, and it's highly unlikely that balance will ever shift. Ohio State is going to have more resources than Pitt. Texas is going to have more resources than Pitt. That's not going to change. But that doesn't mean you can't succeed. You just have to be smart. And it's a tough sell that you're going to have to be the program with less resources being smarter and outperforming the programs with more resources, because presumably those programs with more resources will be able to dedicate more money to doing the research to be smarter themselves. But that's how you have to win. That's how you have to succeed. They've found different things. I think, you're talking about Pitt football. They've found something with linebackers, and they've found something with safeties where they've found the right kinds of guys to play the right kind of way in the right kind of system. And maybe other teams will adapt and start doing similar things and going after similar players. But for now, Pitt has a pretty good handle on these types of linebackers, these types of safeties. Maybe they're building something similar with these types of running backs and receivers. We keep talking about Cade Bell has a type of running back and receiver that he really seems to prefer. He's had success with these kinds of guys in the past, and he's certainly loaded up with them this offseason between transfers and freshmen. So, but if he's right, then they've found something there too. Guys they can get, guys they can afford, guys who fit the budget and can come in and make plays. That's how you have to win. So it can be a net positive. 8 wins can continue to be what should be the floor for this football program. It can be, but you've got to be smart in how you do it. You're not going to have the wiggle room where if you blow it on one guy, you're probably not going to have the depth to make up for it that particular season. If you get your evaluation wrong, it's going to set you back. So you've got to be smart about it. You've got to be good at what you do. And then, yeah, you can succeed. You can find Braylon Lovelace. You can find Kyle Lewis. You can find Rasheem Biles, who gets told by Penn State and other schools that he's too big to be a safety, or he's too slow to be a safety and too small to be a linebacker. All right, well, you know what? You fit what we want to do, so we're going to bring you in. We're going to coach you up. We're going to get you to the point where you can go out, and then you're going to go out and make plays. And then you're probably going to get poached. It can be done, is my point. It can be done. It's just you have a smaller margin for error, and you got to be really good at your job. Final question. Melwood 343. Now that Jerry DiPaola is retiring, will you take up the mantle of asking Pat Narduzzi questions about injuries during fall camp? Somebody's got to do it. I guess I'm the veteran reporter on the beat. I covered Pitt longer than Jerry did, but Jerry's been doing the job like twice as long as I have overall. So Jerry's covered a lot of things. He's covered the Steelers, high school, Pitt for the last 14 years, something like that. And so, somebody's going to have to take up that mantle. I guess I could take it upon myself. Special shout out to Jerry, though. Truly a guy who never lost sight of what the job was, of what you're trying to do. You're trying to go out there and tell those stories. You're trying to go out there and report on what's going on with the team. You understand who your audience is, who you're writing for, and what they want. And what they want is stories about the team. And that's what you're there to do. And I think, Jerry was in his prime, in all elements of the job, whether it was covering games and writing game stories, whether it was press conferences and asking questions. And one of the best things about Jerry, and this is something that, look, Jerry always adapted to, the changing demands of the job. But as the job became something different in recent years, probably the last 10 years or so, and the approach to the job became different in the last 10 years. One thing I always appreciated about Jerry is that he was always unassuming in his coverage. He might have had an idea of why one player played over another, or why one decision was made, or why one outcome was arrived at. He might have had an idea about that, or a theory, but he was always willing to ask the question. And he was always very observant of the answer and respectful of the answer. And if the answer didn't jive with his theory, well, he stood corrected. And I appreciate it. Not that he was like wrong all the time or something like that, but he was very unassuming. He allowed the subjects to tell the story. It wasn't about Jerry. It was about Pat Narduzzi or Nate Yarnell or Desmond Reed or Jeff Capel or Bub Carrington or whoever it was. That was what the story about. It wasn't about Jerry. And I appreciate that. And, sports journalism, sports writing has changed so much over the years. But Jerry carried a lot of those things that were most important in the job. And he never lost sight of that. And he's a great guy to have around. He was a great guy to have around, friendly to everyone. And never really took much personally. He was hardworking, honest, humble, unassuming, good guy, and we'll certainly miss him on the beat. If you see him at the spring game tomorrow, give him a fist bump, tell him good job, and wish him a happy retirement. We certainly do. I should have got the bottle out and done a shot for Jerry today, but maybe we'll get one during the season. But anyway, also nice shout out to Pat Narduzzi for giving Jerry a send off at practice yesterday. They gave him a jersey with his name on it and the number 53 because he's been doing this job for 53 years, which that's a long time. That's a long time. But nice gesture from Pat Narduzzi. And like we say, best wishes to Jerry. He's the man. We'll miss him. And if you see him, like I say, if you see him tomorrow at the Blue Gold game, give him a fist bump and tell him to ask another injury question. All right, thanks for all the questions this week. I really appreciate it. These are always fun to do. We got a nice long Morning Pitt Mailbag for you this week. So like and subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. And Yeah, that's it. We'll have some morning pits for you next week, Monday and Tuesday. And then, of course, lots of coverage from spring camp, the blue gold game, and everything like that. All right there at Panther-Lair.com. Check out the site. All right, thanks for watching the videos this week. Thanks for watching the Morning Pitt Mailbag today. Hope you have a great Friday. Enjoy the blue gold game tomorrow, and we will catch up with you on Monday for the Morning Pit right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.